Not gonna lie, I would really like to have one of these little Chaos Bucklers here. They are pretty neat. Today we're going to be talking about basic Centigors. Recently talked about the great weapon variant of the unit. So today, here we are with the basics. Tesla, who has been emerging recently as a bit of a Beastmen specialist, acquitted himself very well in the faction war today, which I'm recording on the day that it happened. He's got his Beastmen here up against Norsca, which can potentially be a bit of a weird matchup for Beastmen, given that they don't have any fire damage. Just kind of some weird interactions in this one. He's got some Gore herds up front, Ungor Spearman herd, Morgar the Shadowgave, of course, leading the way, Brave Shim, Lore of Death, just with Spirit Leech. Yeah. The Pig Herds, and the Centigors, the Butchers of Calvengard, one unit of spawn. We've got Double Manticore, Wolfric, a bunch of Berserkers, some regular Marauders, a Marauder Horseman, 2 Skin Wolves, and yeah, some more Berserkers. Famir of Fire, definitely very nice. One of the weird interactions in this matchup is between Berserkers and all Beastmen infantry. Berserkers are just very good at killing infantry. You can see Tesla kind of pulls back from that direct engagement there, and he's going to move in with these spawn, the Butchers of Calvengard, to help win out on that engagement. But the Centigors, this is about them. We can see one sweeping around here, the other two sweeping up and around this flank. The Centigors are interesting. For light cavalry, they sit at kind of an interesting cost at 700 points. They're above many other light cavalry units, like, you know, your typical around 500 cost light cavalry, like the Elves have. A lot of the Hounds are maybe a little above or below that cost as well. The Centigors sit like pretty solidly above that. They do have 45 charge, decent stats. The perfect vigor is also quite nice if their leadership can stay high. But here, Tesla's going to use them in kind of a counter skirmish role to go after these Marauder Horsemen, which is definitely a very solid play. The Butchers of Calvengard and the Chaos Spawns here, their biggest dangers are this mass of Marauder Horsemen. Kind of pressuring them around, not allowing them to just stay set and firing. They kind of push them in this direction. They get some engagements here. They actually help the Chaos spawn as well against these Skin Wolves, which is quite nice. Getting rear charges on Skin Wolves. Because they don't have much armor, only 15 armor, and they rely on their physical resistance, you can see this rear charge here from that Centigor did some very solid damage on those the Skin Wolves. And of course, Centigors are fast enough to chase them off as well. And although they aren't necessarily shock cavalry in terms of their tooltip, in the same way that like Dark Riders and Illyrian Reavers, Glade Riders with Spears, they actually show shock cavalry in their tooltip, right? They should be treated as such. That 45 charge is pretty solid. Not amazing for the cost, but like we'll compare them to Knights Errant and some other, you know, cavalry around that cost in the end there. But right now they're doing a good job, and they're not, they're doing what they should be, I should say. They're not really very tanky units, right? Like their best use cases is for getting good rear charges, side charges, cleaning up light units, kind of harassing in that way. The perfect vigor does help them in that sense. You can see here that they're all still completely fresh, whereas the rest of the units, a few are still fresh, a few are getting tired, especially on the Norscan side. But yeah, the Manticore, countercharging this Manticore as it comes down to the ground is a great strategy as well. Same thing that other Manticore. Manticores are very dangerous, but again, only 45 armor, that decent charge and weapon damage, 32 weapon damage, 45 charge of the Centigors does help kind of clear them out a little bit. Nice burning head here from the Fire Famir. Unfortunately, the leadership not going to be enough. I mean, maybe if Wolfric comes over while that is still active, he can get a terror route here, but right now, the Beastman Swarm is definitely proving to be a bit for the Norscans to handle. That is one pretty clear advantage. Norsca can go pretty heavily into a mobility game, and it's decently strong, but I would argue that Beastmen have a stronger mobility game. Centigors are just such a nice unit in that way. Here they're cleaning up the other Manticore, cleaning up the other Manticore over here. You can see this unit pretty likely to get terrified here. Their leadership's not amazing, as they are Beastmen, but they're holding enough for their Centigor brethren to get another rear charge in here. And this kind of yeah, hit-and-run tactics is really what these Centigors are designed for, very much so. You should, like I said, they say bestial cavalry in the tooltip. They really should say shock cavalry, even though, you know, they do have shields as well, which is, I mean, I guess a lot of shock cavalry in this game have shields. It's not that strange. Anyway, back to the Big Mammoth. He is just holding for the time being. A lot of his units aren't really going to do great at fighting Wulfric directly, which could be a problem in the late game. He does still have the Butchers of Kalkengard, though. 11 models there. They're regenerating quite a bit of HP, so Tesla is doing exactly what he should at this point, which is to use his mobility to just avoid fighting the Mammoth as long as he can, and clean up these other peripheral units that he absolutely has the tools to. Like, these Centigors will be able to catch and kill these Horsemen, given that the Horsemen are getting, I guess they're not too tired yet. And they are 90 speed base, which the Centigors are a little slower base, actually, but since they have that Bestial Surge, they end up being faster in practice, as long as that Bestial Surge is active. Which is quite a good ability to keep active. Sorry, not Bestial Surge. Primal Fury, the Beastmen's kind of army ability that many people forget about. They forget that the Beastmen were the first faction, really, to have like an army-wide ability like this. It's decent. The extra speed and charge bonus, Mutant Psychology drops off when you don't need it, or when you need it most, rather, which is kind of rough. But the melee attack, the charge bonus, and speed is all very relevant in this type of situation. Now, cleaning up Marauder Horsemen there. Some more Marauder Horsemen out here. But at this point, the Butchers of Kalkengard can come in and get a mostly isolated Wulfric without these javelins coming to harass too much, and that's exactly what needs to happen. Manticore does drop down to try and support Wulfric. Centigors are in a position, though, once again, to respond with a nice little countercharge here, keep them locked in, and also keep Wulfric from getting to Morgur, who just had a Hunter of Champions cast on him, down to 5 melee defense. Ooh, rough stuff. Sorry for the background noise, guys. My cat's kind of massacring this desk right now, but anyway. Yeah, Morgur might actually get killed here, though. Unfortunately, the protection doesn't really last. Centigors do get terrified, of course. Again, leadership's not amazing, but the Butchers of Kalkengard are able to come in. There's still a pretty healthy unit of Centigors out here as well. These Centigors will come back from being terrified, too. So at this point, balance of power starting to show. I mean, Beastmen do get some false balance of power inflations as it is, but I think this is pretty true. Wulfric, he's a beast, don't get me wrong. Ha, beast against the Beastmen. But he can't hold up to this just wild swarm here. And still, especially Butchers of Kalkengard, just being able to tank and regenerate. Mir gets caught out. Centigors are going to clean him up. And that should be just about all she wrote. Wulfric will keep fighting for a little longer, no doubt. But Butchers, Centigors come in, clean him up. And again, look at that. Just great job by Tesla. Finding these units that are isolated and weak, tattered, charging them down, making sure routing units don't come back. That's one of the primary roles of light cavalry, is chasing routing units. Although Centigors are, like I said, a little more expensive than certain other types of light cavalry, they're not going to fulfill that role as cost effectively. They still will absolutely fulfill that role, and in a way, too, that they can actually hit a little bit harder than some other units in that sort of class, right? So there's the victory for Tesla. Very fun stuff. Big thanks for sending that one in. Centigors, yeah, they really shined in this one. And this is a matchup where I didn't really necessarily think to bring them, because in my mind, like, they actually lose to Skinwolves, and that's probably what a lot of you are thinking as well. But, you know, like Tesla showed here, if you actually get good engagements with the Centigors, like if you play smart, play like shock cavalry and actually, you know, don't get charged directly by the Skinwolves, but rather get like a rear side charge on them with the Centigors, actually can be a nice counter tool. Maybe that's an argument for the armored Skinwolves in this matchup. But yeah, in terms of damage value here, let's take a look. Morgur, basically just ignore him. Brave Shaman also got a little bit of damage in just from Spirit Leeching. He's probably decently cheap, so it's hard to say on that value. Gore Herds definitely get pretty beat up in this matchup. They do okay against some units, but look at these Centigors, man. 1,000 damage value, 1263, another 1,100 there. Very good stuff. The Pig Herds also. Couple of them, one of them at least, paying for itself. The other one's decently close. Spawns did reasonably well, and the Butchers of Kalkengard also paid for themselves largely, 1,500 points. Yeah, very fun stuff. The Centigors are absolutely the bright spot here, though. It's cleaning up a lot of these peripheral units. Wulfric, as you would expect, an absolute monster, 3,000 damage value, 22,000 damage dealt. Absolutely insane. The Famir, pretty impressive too. 10,000 damage dealt, only 1,100 damage value, but pretty good stuff. Chaos Marauders, reasonably cost effective. They generally tend to be the Berserkers as well, kind of mixed bag, but generally paid for themselves. A Horseman, one of them did, a couple of them did. The other ones could have done a lot more, though, all things considered. They have a lot of kind of target saturation here. The Manticores, one of them absolutely paid for itself, just was able to hang around and get some good tear routes, get some good damage in. The other one was well countered by those Centigors, which again is sort of an interaction you would think a Manticore for sure would just kill Centigors and tear route them. But in fact, again, Centigors pick their engagement, which their speed kind of allows them to do so. They get a lot of damage value in that way. Same thing, countering the Skin Wolves quite well, so it's an interesting one. You know, the Centigors, like I said, this is a use case that I personally wouldn't have thought to do, but I like looking at it now, it totally makes sense to me, right? The low armor of the Skin Wolves is kind of vulnerable to the Centigors. And now, just for some comparisons, let's look at some of the other kind of, I guess probably should have kept the High Elves up here, but the Elven Light Cavalry is an interesting comparison, because they have pretty decent stats as well. They are a little bit cheaper generally, right? 500, and then it's what? 550, 550, right? So, coming in, Glade Riders, I guess, probably most comparable, since they also have Woodsmen. Yeah, again, faster baseline, but that Bestial Surge does come into play if the leadership can stay high, which if they're sort of avoiding bad engagements, the leadership should, in theory, stay high. Vanguard Deployment, just like the Glade Riders. Glade Riders, slightly better melee attack and defense, but less weapon strength, significantly so as well. 5 weapon strength for a unit of this sort of cost is a pretty significant change. They also have less HP, significantly less HP, and a little more armor. Oh, sorry, a little less armor, rather, which is interesting. Yeah, and the greater charge and weapon damage, especially once you factor in the Primal Fury there, it gives the Centigors a definite damage advantage. Likewise, the Perfect Vigor is something that's hard to kind of put a value on. If it is disabled if they're wavering only, but even if they're above wavering, they're still going to get that Perfect Vigor and a little bit of extra leadership, so you can actually kind of increase that leadership stat more or less by 4, and then they have a slight advantage in that realm. They are a little bit better than Dark Riders all around, except for their melee defense. Again, 6 weapon strength, 2 charge, significantly more HP. The HP one is pretty big too, and the armor as well. Lyrian Reavers do have slightly better armor, but again, way less HP. Slower without the Bestial Surge, about the same leadership actually with the buff, and 5 less weapon strength, 2 less charge bonus. So looking at these, like it may seem like the Centaur is not super cost efficient, and it can struggle in some circumstances compared to these Elven Light Cavalry, but, I mean, 150 points is not that much of a difference over, say, Reavers or Glade Riders with shields, and given that they have this specialist toolkit of Woodsmen and the Perfect Vigor, some other kind of niche abilities, and extra HP, really helps them in a lot of scenarios, right? So, for units more directly cost, kind of comparable, Bretonnian Knights Errant are an interesting one, because they actually do hit harder on the charge, less weapon strength, but very comparable melee stats, and they are slower, obviously, and more heavily armored. So it's actually, once you compare them to Knights Errant, it kind of makes sense, like, okay, these are, it's, you know, a little bit more, you are paying for some of those abilities, but you pay for the speed a little bit too in kind of this direct comparison, but they are very comparable units, certainly. And I would consider them of the same power level, which is appropriate to the cost, obviously. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that one. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.